On a quiet morning in Broomfield, Colorado, on December 14, 2023, Officer John O'Hare responds to a routine welfare check. The call comes from a man named Daniel Krug, who tells dispatch he hasn't been able to reach his wife for several hours. O'Hare parks his patrol car in the driveway and steps onto its bumper to see inside the garage. When he looks through the window, he spots 43-year-old Kristil Krug lying on the concrete floor. She is unresponsive, bleeding from a massive head wound and a fatal stab to the chest. Moments after police secure the perimeter, Daniel Krug comes sprinting down the street. He collapses onto the pavement, sobbing uncontrollably and screaming to the officers that he failed to protect his wife. Inside the property, investigators document two specific anomalies. The front door of the home is unlocked, and someone has placed a strip of blue painter's tape directly over the lens of the Ring doorbell camera. Whoever committed this crime came prepared to bypass the security system, tape the camera, and wait inside the garage. To the family and the responding officers, the evidence points to a targeted ambush, confirming their worst fear. Kristil's stalker had finally made his move. For the previous 2 months, Kristil had been subjected to a relentless harassment campaign. An anonymous user going by the email alias Kickman sent her graphic death threats, along with photos proving that he was watching her and Daniel's daily movements. Kristil had already given police her primary suspect. She believed the messages were coming from Anthony Holland, an ex-boyfriend she briefly dated more than 20 years ago. The threats had escalated so severely that Kristil recently started carrying a concealed handgun. Weeks prior to her death, Daniel even called 911 to report an intruder jumping their fence and stealing a spare house key from their garage. With Kristil dead and a massive file of stalking complaints already on record, investigators dedicate their resources to hunting down Anthony Holland. They quickly issue a nationwide warrant for his arrest. Within hours of the murder, local officers track Holland to his residence in Eagle Mountain, Utah, roughly 500 miles away from Broomfield. They surround the property, bracing for a confrontation with a violent killer. Instead, they are met by a confused, heavily intoxicated man. Holland has no idea why police are pounding on his door, and he is entirely unaware that Kristil has been murdered. Holland hands the officers a Kohl's retail receipt for a sweatshirt he purchased that very afternoon. The timestamp on the receipt reads 12:16 p.m. on the exact date of the murder. Medical examiners estimate Kristil was attacked around 8 a.m. It is an 8-hour drive from the crime scene in Colorado to Eagle Mountain. Holland could not have murdered Kristil and stood at a checkout counter in Utah just 4 hours later. With Holland cleared by his physical location, the collapse of their primary theory leaves investigators with a disturbing realization. The person who murdered Kristil possessed the technical capability to fabricate a complex digital identity to frame an innocent man. Detectives secure expedited warrants for the tech companies hosting the Kickman accounts. The data returns a precise origin point.
The IP addresses, which are unique numerical labels assigned to devices connected to a network, trace back to the public Wi-Fi at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Daniel Krug's office. This timeline visualization shows the activity logs from the Krug family's Google Nest security system. Google Nest is a smart home security platform that allows users to monitor their cameras via a phone app. At exactly 8:15 a.m. on the morning of the murder, someone manually deactivated every camera on the property, except for the one pointed outside the garage. 10 minutes later, that single active camera records Daniel pulling out of the driveway. Office badge data and security footage show him walking into his building around 9 a.m., chatting with coworkers and going about his morning routine. The graphic threats, the surveillance photos, the stolen house key, none of it came from an obsessed ex-boyfriend in Utah. The architect of the harassment campaign was Daniel Krug himself. Detectives bring Daniel back and confront him with the IP data, tracing the Kickman emails to his office. His demeanor instantly shifts from a sobbing, grieving widower to a cold, defensive suspect who immediately asks for a lawyer. Family interviews outline the true motive. The marriage was failing, and Kristil recently told Daniel she wanted a divorce. In response, Daniel manufactured a terrifying external threat, hoping to force her to rely on him as her heroic protector. To fund his operation without leaving a paper trail, Daniel purchased Visa gift cards from local retail stores. He used those untraceable cards to buy the digital infrastructure required to build and maintain the Kickman persona. But his plan was failing.
Kristil had recently confronted Daniel, telling him directly that she suspected he was actually the one sending the messages. Facing exposure and the impending loss of his family, Daniel ambushed her in their own garage. A forensic extraction of Daniel's devices reveals his exact mindset in the final hours before the attack. The night before the murder, Daniel searched online for how to strike someone's head to render them unconscious. Analysts also dissect the surveillance photo of Daniel supposedly taken by the stalker outside his office. The image metadata, which is the hidden digital information detailing exactly when and how a photo was captured, proves the picture was taken on Daniel's phone using a selfie timer propped against a car. Furthermore, cell tower records indicate that the cheap burner phones used to send the harassing text messages pinged the exact same communication towers as Daniel's personal smartphone. He was carrying both devices simultaneously. 2 days after the murder, a swarm of police units surround Daniel's car in a King Soopers grocery store parking lot, placing him under arrest. He is later found guilty of first-degree murder and stalking, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Daniel Krug engineered an elaborate, months-long deception that successfully fooled local police and terrified his own family. But the digital illusion he built to get away with murder left a permanent trail of data, one that ensured he would never walk free again.